What's up, guys and gals of the movement world? It's Sean Mishka, the Movement Miyagi, coming to you with a special feature here today. And it's a special feature that I'm very, very excited for. If you remember back to when we did our Jonathan Taylor Mover of the Year analysis for 2021, I put together this video oriented around what would ever happen if Jonathan Taylor and I partnered together. And so I decided here this spring and into the summer, I'm going to dive into maybe some of the more skillful, more dexterous, more masterful movers across the league and try to discuss that which what I see from their movement skill set, that which what I believe exists within the gaps within their skill set, and how I may personally, as a sport movement skill acquisition coach, attempt to help them fill in those respective gaps. And so I thought that I would start with none other than Saquon Barkley, the 2018 Mover of the Year. And the reason why I wanted to start here and why I'm so excited about this is because right now across the league, probably no player have I watched more film of. No player have I actually dove in as deep as I have with Saquon Barkley, trying to get within their movement system, trying to tell their movement problem solving story, try to determine what they're perceiving, what they're intending to do, how they're acting. And the greatest thing for me about this thought experiment is that I believe that the potential of Saquon Barkley is still tremendous. Now, I know that a lot of people are going to point the finger and say, well, Sean, in these last couple of seasons, Saquon Barkley wasn't exactly that which what he was in the standard that he set in his rookie year back in 2018 when I named him the Mover of the Year, the only rookie ever, of course, to be my Mover of the Year. But the potential is all still there, guys and gals. And that really is the deal when it comes to Saquon Barkley. Yes, he's dealt with some injuries over and over and over again back into the 2020 season with an ankle that really seemed to sideline him for the majority of the season. 2019. 2020, then the ACL that in just the second game of the season not only set him back, but obviously kind of put him behind the eight ball then for the 2021 season last year. And the thing is, with Saquon, under the right circumstances, under the right conditions, I personally still believe that Saquon Barkley has the potential to be the most dexterous mover in the entire league at any position. And in fact, his potential is so high yet because of namely some of the things we're going to get into today. Some of the meat that's still on the bone for Saquon, if you will, some of the gaps that still need to be filled. These were the same gaps that existed when he was the most dexterous mover in the league back in the 2018 season, which I know for some in the NFL, that feels like an eternity ago. However, if he can regain some of the things that allowed him to get to that point, and I do believe that he can, again, under the right circumstances, then it's there when and if he were to fill in those respective gaps. And I'll put the Saquon Barkley 2018 Mover of the Year feature in the notes below, so you can kind of remind yourself as to what I was seeing and what we discussed back then. Now, for 4.5 years ago, right? And so I think if we were to fill in some of those gaps, if he were to fill in some of those gaps by participating in the right activities and getting the right experiences, he would be able to adjust his perceptions, his cognitions and intentions, and his actions, and to become more tightly coupled to the world around him. And that's really what we're going to get into today. Where it is that I believe that if Saquon Barkley attacked head on, and it wouldn't take that long a period of time because he is super hyper adaptable. We're talking about a guy that is still very, very young in his National Football League career. So hence the reason I'm as excited as I am about this one. Let's go ahead and dive into it. Before we get any further, of course, I want to remind you guys what my paradigm is oriented around. It's about becoming a movement problem solver, where obviously, kind of taken by my man Nikolai Bernstein, this idea of dexterity and movement skill, the ability to find any movement solution for any emerging movement problem under any situation and under any condition. And the reason why I want to circle the wagons here is because remember, when we dive into the movement skill of any player, any performer, any athlete, it is about this movement problem solving activities that are carried out by the human movement system of the athlete within sport. Those problem solving activities and processes, remember, are going to be integrated ones. Integrated, composed of, underpinned by the intertwined processes of perceptions, cognitions, and actions. And the reason why I'm taking the time to recircle the wagons there is that if this is your first time here at Football Beyond the Stats or listening to hear me speak, you will realize some of the things, particularly the perceptions and the cognitions, or what Saquon may be connecting to out in the world and what he might be thinking and what he might be intending to do and the decisions that he makes, that is where the majority of work needs to be done for Saquon Barkley to fill in those respective gaps and not only get back to who he was in 2018, but get to where I believe the evolution in his potential of becoming Saquon Barkley 2.0 actually exists. So that's the reason why I have this slide in here. In the next one, for that matter as well. Again, Nikolai Bernstein, the idea of dexterity, the ability to solve any emerging movement problem under any situation in any condition. These ideas will be imperative for our discussion. So if we rewind back to 2018, when Saquon Barkley was awarded my 2018 Mover of the Year, what we found from him is this highly emergent, really creative, really novel, super adaptable nature of his movement problem solving states and behaviors. Right. I've been on record numerous times with my friend Matt Caraccio, with my friend Stuart Armstrong, here at Football Beyond the Stats, discussing what I saw from Saquon, which was a rare one off when we talk about rookies entering the league. So these pictures obviously came from that 2018 year. And remember, guys and gals, when we're talking about dexterity, it's not about the movements or the actions per se. It's about how those movements unfold, how they behave in a dynamic interaction with an unfolding alive environment that again presents unexpectedness and surprises. So when we see what Saquon Barkley was capable of doing and was doing week in and week out across the National Football League season against other NFL players with very complex, meaning numerous interacting component parts, especially with the offensive line that he had in front of him at the New York Giants, still has in front of him at the New York Giants to a certain degree, right? As well as this highly emergent and integrated relationship with this dynamically unfolding environment. Like nothing was off limits for Saquon. He was really kind of always out there, honestly and authentically expressing himself. And we're going to get into what that means a little bit later on and how it is that he can reharness that connection, reharness that organizational state of his movement behaviors. But I believe, this is why I believe so much in what he has the potential of still doing in today's National Football League. And again, I know people are going to scoff at me for that, at that statement, at that idea, particularly with the way that he looked across the majority of last season. But we must remember, he was obviously coming off an ACL, and usually it's going to be a 12-month process to not only get return to play, full return to play, but another 12 months for true return to performance, right? Very, very few players have sort of their circa Adrian Peterson, circa 2012 type of moments, right? Very, very, very few guys harness that ability immediately after in that very short time window coming off an ACL and other knee reconstruction to be able to be their best self, their 2.0, if you will. And what I believe that if Saquon right now can find this evolution, refine the abundance within his skill set, refine this authentic fingerprint upon the world that is existing in front of him, kind of playing in a more unbridled way, not restricted by the noise and the words of coaches in the outside world, such as media. Like, I think that has really taken its toll on Saquon Barkley's movement skill, not to mention, obviously, the injuries. but I don't think the injuries are going to send him back nearly as much as what most people will say. Now, if we rewind back to 2018 and then in 2019, Saquon Barkley was able to solve problems that most people could not. However, that happened because of his authenticity. That happened because of his creativity, and his adaptability and compensation ability just happened to be better than everybody else's. His physical characteristics followed some of those psychological characteristics. However, if you rewind back to that breakdown, that analysis of who he was and what it is that he still possessed at that time for opportunities or weaknesses, gaps within his movement skill set, you may recall that I was somewhat critical at that time of his lack of perceptual sensitivity, his lack of perceptual attunement, his ability to pick up what was really happening in the world and then coordinating, controlling, and organizing the most efficacious, the most functional, the most dexterous movement solution off of it. So I believe that the path to Saquon 2.0 actually comes from him getting connected and coupled to the information in the world around him. Now, I know that's really easy to say and much, much harder to do, but it's really hard to do if you're not in the right learning and training environment, which I don't believe that Saquon Barkley actually is. And we're going to get into a little bit more of that to come. But what we have found from Saquon, even if you look at his film, and we're not going to necessarily be able to show clips per se, but I think the next times that you go back and watch him, even on highlights, but also across plays, like if you have an NFL next gen stats or game pass, you'll be able to dive into some of these things and see that when the complexity increases, again, when I talk about complex movement problems, we're talking about numerous interacting component parts, more parts in tighter spaces, more information to have to deal with, maybe more chaos, maybe more disorder, right? And when this complexity increases, which it often has for Saquon Barkley, because again, the people in front of him haven't always been the best blocking unit across the league, right? And that's an understatement. That has brought a certain amount of overwhelming nature. Saquon hasn't really had the ability to really get comfortable. He's lacked comfort. He's lacked this connection, and things are changing too quickly in front of him. They're too dynamically unfolding, and he can't actually tune into the information about that unfolding problem, at least as functionally as he needs to. So there's either too much information or it's changing too rapidly that he can't actually quote unquote make sense of it. He can't actually detect it optimally, be sensitive to that which what exists that is informing him of opportunities to move at certain times. And then what we find is that the degrees of freedom, again, degrees of freedom isn't just a motor system thing. The degrees of freedom perceptually, what he's looking at, when he's looking at it, how he's organizing his perceptual qualities and degrees of freedom. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. His cognitive degrees of freedom, the intentions that he has, and some of this openness and responsiveness to the changing landscape in the world. And then ultimately the action system degrees of freedom or the motor system degrees of freedom as well. So we see fixed and frozen nature across all of those dimensional levels of the human movement system, perceptual, cognitive, and motor, right? And so then we find that he doesn't organize an integrated movement solution, which is all that integrated. It doesn't actually match or meet the needs of the respective problem in front of him. And this is why I believe that sometimes the world seems to be moving a little bit too quickly for Saquon Barkley around him. These problems are too complex. They've stretched him too far to his challenge point, and he's not actually connecting to the world around him. And he's moving for movement's sake. He's making moves for movement's sake. And we're going to highlight that a little bit more to come. So this Bruce Lee quote, much like the one that I'm wearing across my shirt that says, "Be water, my friend." This other quote is something that I believe Saquon Barkley should harness or remember or use as a theme as to what he does and use it to guide all of his training within the learning environment. That the highest technique is to have no technique. Remember, it's not about the movements or actions themselves. Instead, my technique is a result of your technique or the opponent's or the teammates. My movement is the result of your movement. So really all Bruce Lee was saying at this time, and you guys have heard me say this before, but I want to circle the wagons for this for Saquon Barkley. If your movement begins to connect and become coupled to the opportunities, to the needs, to the challenges in the world in a very sensitive way, that is the path to Saquon 2.0. So that connection and coupling essentially leads to this idea of attunement. Remember, sensitivity to the specifying information in the world around him, and adaptability, meaning the adjustability of the movement actions in close, tightly coupled relation to the information that he picks up. So connection and coupling, attunement, and adaptability. Okay. So these aims and objectives now have a few different things that if Saquon and I were partnering together, we would try to address an attack. And I believe that anyone who's in his corner, hopefully, will try to attack some of these things. Now, the first one, that abundance, that degeneracy in ecological dynamics terms, or complex systems terms as well, this degeneracy or abundance just simply means having more strategies to be able to solve similar behaving problems at relatively close levels. Okay, so he being Saquon had this capability back in 2018 and 19. Okay. And before some of these injuries started to pile up, and before some of these other shortcomings or challenges within his movement skill set started to make themselves known or show themselves a little bit more frequently. So now, a year removed from the ACL back in 2020, back in September 2020, as he gets closer and closer to that, I would suspect naturally, just inherently, he's going to begin to regain some of that abundance. We didn't see it across most of 2021. He was very constrained. He was very restricted. You could see that he had some fixed and frozen degrees of freedom from a motor system standpoint, which really wasn't the case when he was at his most successful self. The thing that I would implore Saquon to try and attack or add would be the authenticity of the abundance of those strategies. So finding his own way of moving again, like what we saw when he was hurdling guys, like what we saw when he was Walter high stepping all over the place, like what we saw when he was doing these crazy Barry Sanders like jukes and cuts, right? He needs to get back to chasing the abundance, but also chasing the authenticity. Okay. That's where adaptability will actually come from. Remember, before one can truly be dexterous, they have to have abundance or degeneracy. Okay. Abundance precedes adaptability, degeneracy precedes dexterity. So a wide open movement toolbox, when he can get back to opening that toolbox fully and then find a way to express the right move at the right time in the right way for him, that I believe is the path. I know that's easier said than done, of course, right? But he was once there. He just has to be able to get that toolbox wide open again. And of course, any guy, when they're coming off ACL, MCL, meniscus, anything major like what Saquon did, they're going to say the right things, right? They're going to say, oh, I feel like myself. I feel like a better version of myself. But it was pretty obvious that Saquon wasn't the best version of himself last year at any point across the entirety of the National Football League season. His toolbox was really constrained and really closed. That meant limited strategies. We saw him resorting. We didn't see the same hurdles. We didn't see the same deceptive nature, the creative nature in his speed qualities or capabilities. Yes, he can still hit the gas pedal with the best of them, because that is obviously a world-class quality that he possessed, and also one that doesn't get taken away very much when one has an ACL, right? It's more of the shimmy, the shake, the juke, the low coiled cutting actions that we didn't see from Saquon. We didn't see that authenticity that I believe that was his calling card in 2018 and into the 2019 season. The second point here that I would aim to address if I were partnering with Saquon in any way, shape, or form would be his awareness of the world, as well as his awareness within or in the world. So not only an awareness of what is out there, him taking in more of that information. We're going to get into a number of themes then that kind of spin off of this, but you can tell he's not overly aware. He's very much in his own self. He's very much in his own feelings, just trying to dictate how it is that the world should behave because of him. But in the National Football League or in life as a whole, guys and gals, I think we all know that this has to be this mutual reciprocal relationship between oneself and oneself's world, right? Or one's world. And I think it's there that I would love to see Saquon pay more attention to. So at all times, kind of having more of this 360-degree perceptual sensitivity, trying to pick up new nuances of the world around him in the football plays themselves, of course, because that's when we see it manifested. That's when we see this lack of awareness show itself, right? There's a lack of sensitivity to point three. But also, I think he can start working on these types of things outside of football as well. Just being able to read the room, just being able to read the world will start to help him become more connected to it. And that connection and coupling, that attunement and adaptability starts with this awareness. And once one begins to become more aware of how things are changing in the world and more aware of that, when I change in some way, when I behave in some way, the world changes too. And as the world changes, that creates different opportunities for me. This feeds into, in a reciprocal way, and also like this very closely, tightly coupled way to the sensitivity to opportunities, aka affordances, in and across the landscape. This was something that back in 2018, I was very critical of Saquon. I thought that the potential for him to become arguably the greatest mover of all time, even in comparison to guys like this, was really there because of the abundance. But he had to, in order to get to that type of point, that type of echelon, that type of transcendent movement skill, this was the place, this sensitivity, perceptual attunement to the opportunities, to the information in the landscape and across it. Unfortunately, as his athleticism got notched down a couple of notches or got taken down a couple of notches because of some of the injuries that he dealt with, he actually did not compensate in a way where it was positive for him to connect to the world. And that happens, particularly if you're in learning environments that are just allowing you to keep moving for movement's sake and not actually moving in a way where your movements matter based on how someone else is behaving. Okay, or someone else's movements matter based on how you're behaving, vice versa, right? Remember, it's a mutual reciprocal information exchange, oneself and one's world. And so there, that extra sensitivity or need for it will lead into an exploration of different fits of the movement solution, perceptions, intentions, and actions, or the decisions one makes, the strategies one uses, how they may organize those movement strategies and solutions to truly fit the needs, challenges, and opportunities of an ever-changing, dynamic, and complex movement problem. And that's why you see my 4 words that I hold near and dear to my heart, much like the be water, my friend, my idea of to become one with. That is the objective for Saquon Barkley, or it should be the objective of Saquon Barkley. The potential is still there. Connect and couple, attune and adapt, but to become one with the problems of the world. So there isn't this big separation between how he acts and what actually exists out there in the world around him. So to perceive to act, but also act to perceive in a vice versa nature. In contrast to what he's doing right now, I feel like he's often acting without perceiving. He's trying to dictate. His actions are not closely and intimately coupled or tied into what the problem is dictating for him. So I would attempt to essentially offer and lead him, facilitate this deeper, richer connection and experience of the world around him. How will we do that? A number of different themes would take place if it were Saquon and I and we were embarking on this endeavor. And then we'll get into some real specifics as well. Theme one, like I've already mentioned, honestly, authentically expressing himself. This is a place and a state of mind that he was in back in 2018 and before that at Penn State. Like Bruce Lee said, to use no way as the way, no limitation is the limitation. But in these last couple of years, we've seen the movement skill set become constrained. Okay. We didn't see the same adjustability. We didn't see the same compensation in a positive way. We didn't see the same access to certain movement positions and certain movement patterns that were the calling card of Saquon Barkley 2018 and 19 and prior to that point in Penn State. Okay. And some of that is of really no fault to his own because it's the knee injury and the reconstruction and the return to play process that just naturally has to take its course. Okay. So I believe that this will occur with or without me to a certain degree, or with or without methods that I'm about to advocate for. But what he must get his mindset on is that it isn't about behaving in the way that he used to. It's about getting to a point or place where he can behave in the next best version of himself, who he is now in 2022 and beyond. And let that be a constant skill adaptation, constantly changing, constantly dynamic, constantly evolving, getting more access to it, but finding the way to express it again at the right place at the right time. We think to his spin move, he often limits himself to go from left to right and then to go left. We don't really see it going back the other way. We see the jump cut is somewhat limited. We didn't find him last year at these low, deeper coiled angles and positions that we see him executing from right here. We saw in 2018, he was able to do the right things from almost all positions, right? Like he'd get caught in these really compromising, really almost awkward, novel positions, and he would still find a way to execute from it. We don't see that quite as much from him anymore, but I believe that that potential still exists for him. But in training and in practice and in everywhere, you essentially have to make that what you repeatedly do. Okay. So to get back into putting that authentic touch and don't let the noise of others tell you how you should be behaving, which is, I think, what Saquon, again, to really no fault of his own, even though, it's really easy to say, don't listen to the naysayers, don't listen to the media, shoot, don't listen to your coaches. Because I'm thinking, based on the way that he was solving problems, even in 2019, where he was maybe trying to behave as if he wasn't just an elusive scat back, that he wasn't just a guy who was able to make you miss and make guys look silly. Like he started behaving in a really power and strength oriented fashion at times, maybe sometimes too much when the problem wasn't calling for it. Like, go with what you're feeling, Saquon Barkley. You're the one that's out there. You're the one that sees the world. You're the one that must connect to the world. And hopefully you're the one that's going to couple your most functional movement solution to what the world is giving you. And I hope that under Brian Daboll and staff, he's given the room and flexibility and freedom to be who it is that they drafted with the second overall pick in 2018. Granted, different regime, different coaching staff, different personnel department. However, that's the Saquon that has the potential to go to Saquon 2.0, most dexterous mover in the league. Part of this drop off in his performance, part of this that we saw from him where he wasn't able to solve problems that maybe had opportunities last year in 2021 came from his lack of sensitivity to high sources. Now, this should come as no shock or surprise. I highlighted in 2018 in the Mover of the Year. I've highlighted over the years at various times or places in regards to not only Saquon, but again, a lot of players, right? This sensitivity or increased attunement is a necessity for all movers to become their most skillful and adaptable selves. But what we saw from Saquon that was existent in 2018, but it didn't become magnified until he didn't have all the burst. He didn't have the first and second gear that maybe he had in 2018. It became magnified last year that this lack of sensitivity, this lack of attunement to not only opponents in this interpersonal distance as well as their behaviors, but also to teammates. We saw him getting way too tight to teammates' backs. You can see it in both pictures here, with the top one being oriented around a couple opponents in space. And it's like the problem is behaving in a way where he can't become tuned in to what the information is telling him. And his perceptual, cognitive, and motor system degrees of freedom then become fixed or frozen and hyper constrained. And we see him not able to find himself a solution. So it's like his brain is just all kinds of places. It's just combobulated, right? And his movement actions, they're trying to unfold. And we can almost see that fixed and frozen degrees of freedom problem right in front of our very eyes as it is occurring. And it was sad for me to see, because I know how he used to be able to feel himself behaving, but also because I know what the potential is for behaving. And if someone is removed from those contexts, that's why this, as I always talk about, this is context dependent, this is context specific. And that's why one must have the opportunity to interact with these types of problems. So this attunement, this sensitivity, this perceptual connection to this information takes place through interpersonal distance between oneself and one's opponent, between oneself and one's teammate, opponent posture and mechanics. Again, he didn't have to use to rely on this, but this was one of his calling cards as well. In 2018, no one was better at solving 1v1 movement problems than Saquon Barkley. But now oftentimes he gets himself overly connected to the information about somebody right in front of him. And he's not actually taking in the information. His eyes are like got this glazed over look, and he isn't actually even able to completely understand or have a knowledge of how that person is behaving in relation to himself. The opponent bearing angles. The opponent bearing angles was something that he has never really had to become attuned to until last year, when the speed in the gas pedal wasn't the same as it was prior to 2021, right? So with the ACL kind of derailing him a bit, he now wasn't able to have that same action capability in relation to the opponent's bearing angle, much in the way that we're seeing here. So he would start acting differently because he's trying to take in that information and try to see if there's some sort of opening or opportunity that exists for him. And the same thing then goes for relative velocity. He's trying to connect to that information, but it wasn't really unfolding in the same way that it once did, right? And then, of course, when he doesn't have the same gas pedal, opening and closing gaps that he used to be able to pass through are no longer passable because he doesn't have the action capabilities of going through it. Pardon me, I just have to take a quick drink. So then that all feeds into this attunement across the landscape of affordances, right? Across the entire landscape. Again, another problem that he had back in 2018 and 19 that went unaddressed because of his action capabilities. Okay. As I've told you guys here before at Football Beyond the Stats, when one becomes a more skilled behavior, when one becomes a more skilled mover, a more dexterous mover, one's perception becomes wider, finer, and more resolute at times, longer and deeper, right? So this is just a fancy way of saying that across this landscape, one is able to connect to more opportunities, aka affordances, across the landscape of the environment that exists in front of oneself, right? As I've already mentioned, right now, Saquon Barkley becomes way too fixated on that which lies right in front of him in a tunnel. And he's always had this issue to a certain degree. It's why sometimes his movement within tight traffic, he misses opportunities in his periphery, to his right, and to his left, because he's anchored right here down the tunnel, okay, down his focal vision, and you can see it. He's right here, right now, what's in front of him. It's also why he was as good as he was at solving 1v1 movement problems. Because back in 2018, he was connecting to some of that information about that immediate person in front of him, that immediate opponent. Okay. But he would miss opportunities that exist here across the width of the landscape. He would also sometimes miss some opportunities that exist longer and deeper. Okay. So, this fullness, this richness of the world around him, and the perceptual attunement and sensitivity to this layered movement problem solving, which I'm going to get into on the very next slide, is, I think, where Saquon could or should find the biggest opportunity for growth. Okay. Now, one has to be in this type of a learning environment and stretching themselves, challenging themselves to look deeper, to look longer, to look wider. One can't become overly fixated to that which lies in front of them, right? Because then you start to miss those opportunities and it becomes okay to miss them. But because he was compensating so positively and so rapidly, he was adapting with very creative and novel movement strategies and solutions when he was getting in harm's way. We didn't see the lack of perceptual attunement as readily as we do now when he's missing some of these opportunities across the landscape. Okay. So this would be one of my personal biggest focuses for him and with him. And then this leads into this layered problem solving across nested or successive affordances. So having the capability of solving the immediate local movement problem, that movement problem in its disposition that lies right in front of you right now in this moment, based on what's happening behind or through the disposition of the greater global movement problem. Okay. So remember, as I always talk about, there are layers and levels to this when we're talking about evasive agility, truly dexterous movement problem solving. The more skillful movers, okay, the Barry Sanders, the Marshall Falks of the world, the Gail Sayers, what you find them doing through their direct learning and direct perceptual pickup, they become so attuned, so sensitive, so intentional, so open, so responsive that the problem, the way they behave and the way that they solve the immediate local movement problem, that problem that's right in front of them, is happening based on the information they're picking up that exists behind that immediate movement problem. Okay. Remember, like I've already mentioned on a number of cases, there are times that Saquon gets overly fixated on the problem that exists right in front of him. And this is where it will manifest or show itself. There have been some times over the years where Saquon has showed glimpses of this layered movement problem solving. Usually he gets too anchored out in front and he doesn't actually even, whether it's through periphery or more owl-like scatter vision to where he's taking in the information right here in his periphery. You don't see that very much from him. Okay. And you also don't see him actually dart his eyes back and forth from right to left and back to right, to take in that whole landscape. He should practice doing this in context and then come back to that immediate local movement problem, force himself, challenge himself to see deeper within it, that it is about getting this deep richness and this fullness of how is this guy in front of me behaving, but how are the rest of his buddies behaving that are attempting to tackle me? Okay. And there's a bunch of clips that we could show you where he gets way too fixated on that which lies right in front of him. In simpler terms, guys and gals, or Saquon Barkley, if you're listening to this, right? It's kind of this movie star information movement coupling, this movie star connection and coupling, or attunement and adaptability. The Spidey sense, where Spider-Man can just sense what's happening in the world. This ultra instinct where someone just goes into this mode where the world is unfolding in such a deep and rich way that it actually feels like it's happening slowly for you. your cognitions, your brain, you're just like letting them go and more. There's less paralysis by analysis. You're not analyzing in the moment. You're in the zone, right? Or in that flow state, or then in a Keanu Reeves, Neo, Matrix type of style. You're so connected and coupled to things that the bullets are just flying by slowly, and you're just moving and adapting, flowing like water, right? That richness of that experience in the world around him, that is possible. I do believe that when someone has abundance, when someone has degeneracy, adaptability and dexterity can follow, but only if they're placed in the right environment for that to happen. And unfortunately, oftentimes he has been part of some very dead movement problems. And I know that sounds a bit extreme, but you guys have heard me talk before about this idea of aliveness within the movement problems. Saquon badly needs alive movement problems. If I just get my mouse out here for a moment, you'll see up here last year rehabbing at the Giants. That's him just participating in a traditional running back drill, very similar to what we see him here at Penn State, right? Where it's a dead movement problem. Before he ever even starts the activity, it's a true drill, right? They're trying to rehearse a certain way of moving. There's nothing alive in the environment that he must become connected to. We see these two pictures of here, my very least favorite tool in the whole wide world, the agility ladder. Look at him behaving in both of these places. Now, granted, these are pictured snapshots, one at Exos last year in Arizona during his rehab, and then another one here at the Giants. Look at where his head is. Look at the movement patterns. Look how he's moving through them. Again, dead patterns, okay? And they're dead actions. The actions are not organized. So he's moving for movement's sake, just doing more of that, which he's already done, which is already the weakness. And then we can see where there is the most amount of aliveness in both of these activities. I think this one down here in the bottom left-hand corner on your picture was taking place in his combine preparation. But even think about it here, guys and gals. This is a bag that the guy is moving left or right. And Saquon can get as close to that bag as he wants without any threat of being touched by that bag, without any threat of being tackled or tagged off by that bag. And worse yet, a lack of feedback, a lack of connection to who is actually going to be there. There will be a linebacker in the hole, a safety down in the box that he will have to act in accordance to. So an opportunity where a guy could be moving into that space and attempting to tag off, all of a sudden interpersonal distance, posture and mechanics and affordances of one's opponent. The highest technique is to have no technique. My technique is the result of your technique. My movement, the result of your movement. None of that being required here, even though it has more unpredictability, right? And then here we find, okay, he did do something with an opponent. I don't know if anyone out there has seen this video, but Saquon is actually running from here and here, and this guy's moving from here to there where my mouse is going. So even though now he is connected to an opponent, and an opponent who's moving, their movement behaviors are not coupled together. Not coupled together that's going to be representative to how it will look, feel, unfold, and behave like on an NFL Sunday. So yes, it's alive, but the aliveness lacks a representative nature to it. Okay. So Saquon Barkley is probably as bad as any player that I've ever seen badly needs an alive environment, one where he can make mistakes, one where he can check and explore functional fits of movement solutions. Now, there's a whole host of activities, a whole host of learning activities that we could utilize to address some specific problem situations for Saquon Barkley. And now I'm going to do this in a really organic way. You're going to see a bunch of hand drawings. I just want to talk about the constraint manipulation of and around them. A few things here that I want to mention. Remember, the alive movement problems that we talked about back here must be unpredictable, look, act, feel, and unfold like they will in the game. It must be emergent. the athlete must have the opportunity to search the problem in its landscape. He must have the opportunities to perceive affordances. He must have the opportunity to select the affordances. And he must have the ability to act upon the affordances and adapt in accordance to them. Okay. That's where we're at. Now, I'm going to give you, like I said, there's a whole host of activities. And if he were in our learning environment, why I believe he would thrive in our learning environment is we do offer the opportunity to really try to get connected to an unfolding, constantly changing, dynamic, emergent movement problem, right? That's kind of the calling card of that, which what I believe in, and allow someone to find their way through that and adapt in accordance to it. Okay. Couple mentions here. With all of the activities I'm about to show you, as you guys have heard me harp on in the past, we're always looking at repetition without repetition. What does that mean? No two problems that the athlete is going to be intending to solve are going to present truly the same problem. So if no two problems are the same, neither are any two solutions. Okay. We could change the number of opponents, the opponents being in different spaces or in different positions to start with. We can change the space literally rep to rep, and we do. We could change through different opponents. Remember, different opponents allows you to work through the connection to how others may be behaving and what opportunities they have. We could be changing the teammates, even the teammates' behaviors, which is very, very important, is going to change. And we could also change 26's starting position here as well. He could be receiving a ball here, turning and moving into the problem. He could be taking a handoff from a quarterback if we have one. He could be starting at an angle. He could be starting in any one number of ways. And we would change that, and he should change that literally rep to rep to rep. So as all of those moving parts are changing, it changes the complexity. Remember what Saquon's issue is. He has a hard time connecting to the complexity and to the information that's in the world because of that complexity. And of course, there's lots more here across the difficulty. I'm going to show you a couple different levels of problems, if you will. But he must be willing to make mistakes and to stretch the nuances of his integrated movement solution. What do I mean when I say integrated movement solution? What he's perceiving, how he's intending to act, and ultimately how he's acting, attunement and adaptability. But my true worth, or any sport movement specialist's true worth, isn't going to come from the problem setting in the learning environment design. Okay. Yes, some of these things are important. You want to make sure that you investigate the gaps of the solver, of the mover, as deeply as I have in order to understand what problems Saquon Barkley really needs more time and exposure to. Certainly, there's a skill and an art there. But the really true art and the true worth as a sport movement specialist comes through the problem solving interactions and watching how they unfold, and then stepping in accordingly to guide the education of attention or attunement, to guide the education of intention, or helping him and assisting him in becoming more open and responsive and ultimately more adaptable, right? To guide that through the constraints, manipulation, as well as oneself interjecting as a facilitator. So just wanted to say all that. First things first, tight traffic navigation, the main glaring issue and problem. Okay. We want to explore various fits of the integrated movement solution: perceiving, deciding, acting, simultaneous attention to a teammate and an opponent. I would attempt to advise Saquon to slow down, be more patient, own his movement skill emergence, and perceive, select, and act upon the unfolding affordances. And of course, based on the playing running back in today's NFL, or really any year's NFL, is this movement skill within a phone booth. Now, a couple things here. I'm showing two tight traffic navigations. Remember, we can change the number of opponents. Okay, you see this? From 2 on top to 3 on the bottom. We could change where they're starting. Let me get my my little highlighter here. Okay. So if you see that, I can move These guys, so they're both entering in the same spot. That's obviously going to change the problem. I could have them come and enter from left or from right. There's so many different ways to change this. Of course, I could change space. Right now, I have it listed a 4x10 box, tighter space, movement in the phone booth, so on and so forth, right? Now, this part, the teammates and their interactions, is something that I would love to see from Saquon. Like I said, he gets so fixated on opponents in front of him, particularly those right down the tunnel, that he misses how teammates might be behaving, say, with their opponents, right? And so he's missing opportunities that are going to come to pass because he's missing the information. He's lacking the connection there. Okay. And hence the reason I would take this from this type of 3v2 type of activity to a 3v3 activity, where now there's going to be one free defender that he must make miss, his two teammates entering the mix, and who knows which ones they're going to take, right? I want that to unfold differently each and every time. True repetition without repetition within the problem variability, as well as in the process or means of him solving that problem. Okay. So a bunch of different things to think about here. I want him to utilize his teammates and utilize the affordances that are presented to him. The ownership speed, okay, him slowing down, being more patient, maybe more Le'Veon Bell like, maybe more Marshall Faulk like within traffic, I think could serve him well here. That will allow him to become more sensitive, more attuned to those emerging opportunities. Okay. And remember, these guys, these opponents are not tackling him. Okay. But they should act as if they were about to. So then the behaviors that unfold here in the learning environment should behave accordingly. Okay. Then we go from that 2v3 or 3v3 type of action to this 1 versus 1 plus 1 type of action, or problem, I should say, interaction. Here is probably one of the easiest ways. So even if Saquon Barkley, he and I never chat, okay? Imagine that. He and I never chat. This is an easy way for him to get to that place where he is filling in a major gap that he possesses, which is in these types of scenarios, it doesn't matter how long it is. Here I have it listed as 10 to 15 by 6 to 12. That's pretty irrelevant. That's a huge range, right? And I might even do it tighter than that or bigger than that. But what we have to get to, what Saquon has to get to, is to look beyond this guy. Okay. So to look deeper, to look longer, still take in the behaviors of this guy who's converging paths with him, but to look beyond to see how I solve this problem is going to be dependent on where this guy's coming, how he's behaving in relation to me, and how I am changing my relationship with the world, both these two guys and gaps to the left and to the right, or space that is afforded to me. Okay. So a really easy way of setting up a movement problem that allows the running back, the ball carrier, and of course, this is for Saquon Barkley because of one of his major gaps, but this could be used for anyone, guys and gals, obviously, right? Anyone who's going to carry a ball in space. And what we would get is, as I mentioned in number 2 here, a knowledge of the metastable regions for evasive actions. What do I mean by that? Is there will be this interpersonal distance right here that is constantly changing. Okay. So if I look at my arrows, this space is constantly changing. And as that interpersonal distance changes based on how both 26 and the opponent are behaving, it will afford different opportunities for Saquon to move and make this first guy miss. Okay. But it's not, remember, it's not just about the first guy. It's about this guy as well. So we're thinking about all these interacting component parts. Now there's only 1v2, right? However, the complexity of the movement problem, because it is dynamically changing, it's constantly unfolding, there will be affordances that open up, right? There'll be affordances that open up in the gaps to the left and to the right of this dyadic relationship. This guy right here is going to be coming in different directions, right? He could be coming straight down the pipe, He could be moving out here. He could be moving there, all dependent on where Saquon is going. All of these things could be unfolding, but it will allow Saquon to explore those nested success of affordance 3. And finally, it will allow him to explore some of these deceptive qualities within his movement actions again. What do I mean by that? Well, as he aims to deceive or acts to deceive, this dude back here to get deceived into be thinking that Saquon's going to go a certain place that he might not. So he might start off, granted, I have a moving straight to be able to interact with this guy, but this space is his to explore. He might move at a path. So if you look at my arrow, he might move in a path where he's changing his speeds, he's changing his velocity, he's changing his center of mass height, he's giving a little head shimmy shake, all of these types of things. And that might not just happen if he's moving left or right, but even if he's moving straight ahead. These types of interactions and more reps, more exposure here will give him the necessary experience to guide his movement problem solving in space, right? Then we take that and move that from a 1v2, Saquon versus 2, to a 2v2. Okay, so now he has simultaneous perception of not only this opponent again and this one, but also a teammate. Okay, let me get my spotlight back up. So as I mentioned earlier, when Saquon is running up on somebody's back, okay, he often gets too tight, too close, and doesn't have an opportunity to move. He isn't staying open. He isn't staying responsive to that which what is unfolding. So then the affordances, the openings, particularly to the left and to the right, based on the way that this interaction is unfolding, closes down and he runs out of opportunities. Okay. So for Saquon, I believe that he has to become more sensitive to a blocker and the blocker's body mechanics, body posture, and how that interaction between a blocker and a teammate, or a teammate as a blocker and the opponent, are actually unfolding. Okay. And now, again, taking that JJ Gibson idea of wider, longer, deeper, and fuller, he must also, while coming up to this interaction, he should take in information about this guy back here too. Attempt to explore those successive affordances, but gain abundance. Truly search what's in his toolbox. Play around here, be creative, and aim to be adaptive. And now we take it from here to a 2v2 type of problem, now just done at an angle. Okay. So now we still have simultaneous perception of a teammate and opponent